I remember that morning as if it were yesterday, though it feels like a lifetime ago now. The weak light of dawn was barely seeping through the cracks in my curtains, gently rousing me from my restless slumber. I carefully turned over in bed, wincing as my joints creaked in protest. At 80 years old, my weary bones were reluctantly greeting another day. With a deep sigh, I slowly opened my eyes and stared at the cracked ceiling above me. That ceiling had become a symbol of the long years I'd spent alone in this tiny apartment since my husband's passing. Every sleepless night, I'd find myself glaring at it, hating how those cracks seemed to mock my struggle with age and loneliness. Gritting my teeth against the pain, I gradually sat up, feeling a sharp twinge in my lower back. It wasn't a new pain, but it felt particularly cruel then. I wondered if I needed to replace that old, lumpy mattress, or if it was just my aged bones reminding me of the weight they'd carried for so long. Moving cautiously, I swung my legs over the side of the bed and slipped my feet into my worn slippers. As I straightened up fully, another pain ambushed me, a deep, dull ache that radiated through my side. But this, too, was just another of old age's torments, and I managed a wry smile at the thought. Taking careful steps, I made my way to the narrow bathroom just beyond my bedroom. The harsh white light hit me as I left the dim apartment, illuminating the passage of time on my face with stark clarity. Deep wrinkles and age spots were etched into my skin, and dark circles shadowed my faded eyes. After using the facilities, I shuffled slowly to the sink to wash my face and trembling hands. Water droplets clung to my wrinkled skin as I fumbled for a towel to pat myself dry. Again, I found myself staring at my reflection in the time-stained mirror. Running a hand through my thin gray hair, I let out another sigh. The woman looking back at me was a lonely, fragile old lady, a far cry from the vibrant person I once was. I shuffled down the hallway, dragging my feet slightly as I made my way to the kitchen. Needing my morning medication, I flipped on the light switch, squinting at the sudden yellow glare. I opened the cabinet above the sink and took out several pill bottles. With my arthritic fingers, I struggled to open those darn child-proof pill bottles. It was like a cruel joke, making it so hard for us old folks to get the very medicine we need. Finally, I managed to shake out my daily rainbow of pills, my cocktail of survival, as I like to call it. With a trembling hand, I took a sip of water and swallowed them down. I could barely keep track of what each one was for: blood pressure, cholesterol, my aching joints. It was all a blur. Progress, I thought to myself with a bitter chuckle. Modern medicine might give me a longer life, but at what cost? With the taste of pills still lingering in my throat, I surveyed my tiny kitchen for something to eat. The lonely counter with its single chair didn't exactly whet my appetite. The last bit of bread had gone stale and was covered in mold, a perfect metaphor for how I was feeling. With a weary sigh, I tossed it in the trash. I'd have to remember to call in a grocery order later, though the thought of it exhausted me. As I shuffled towards the living room, a chill ran through me. Was it colder than usual, or was it just me? I checked the old boiler, but it seemed to be working fine. It was probably just my poor circulation making every draft feel like an Arctic wind, another of old age's unwelcome gifts. I lowered myself onto my well-worn sofa, wrapping a faded shawl around my shoulders to ward off the chill. I thought about what the day held: a doctor's appointment, some shopping, and endless hours of solitude. Maybe a nosy neighbor would stop by if I was lucky, or unlucky, depending on how you looked at it. If my eyes weren't so bad, I might try to read a book. Hoping it might ease the ache in my chest, I picked up the TV remote with shaky hands and turned it on, trying to fill the eerie silence of my apartment. As the morning wore on, I noticed something wasn't right. The dull pain in my chest, instead of easing, was gradually getting worse. I put a hand to my side and felt it was warm to the touch. This wasn't just arthritis or aging, something was off. I could feel the heat and strange sensations spreading. By noon, I was shaking and sweating. Even with my quilt tucked tightly around my shoulders, I felt like I'd run a marathon, my energy draining away. With a raspy, trembling voice, I called my niece Kimberly, the only family I had left. Kimberly's voice crackled through the phone, laced with worry. She told me I sounded awful and that she was coming right over. Before I could even muster a feeble protest, she had hung up. I felt a pang of guilt wash over me. Kimberly had her own busy life, juggling 2 jobs to support her family. I knew she shouldn't always have to drop everything for her sick old aunt, but I couldn't deny how serious this felt. This wasn't just some common cold. It might have been that nasty flu they'd been talking about on the news. Whatever it was, I felt like I'd been hit by a Mack truck. I lay there on the sofa, my frail body trembling, waiting in increasing discomfort. Time seemed to stretch on forever until finally, Kimberly burst through the door. Her round face was etched with concern as she rushed me to my tiny bedroom to check me over. When she saw how high my temperature was, her eyes went wide with alarm. She immediately wanted to call an ambulance, but I weakly protested. The thought of those medical bills made my head spin even more than the fever. But Kimberly wouldn't hear of it, and I didn't have the strength to argue. I must have looked as bad as I felt. Within half an hour, a team of young, capable-looking EMTs arrived. They lifted my chilled body onto a stretcher and carried me down the narrow stairs to the waiting ambulance. Wrapped in blankets and shivering, I clung weakly to Kimberly's hand as we sped through the noisy, crowded streets. In my fever-addled mind, I wondered if I'd ever see my lonely little apartment again. The bright LED lights of the hospital made me squint as they rushed me into the ER. The white ceiling blurred above me, seeming to flow like a river as they wheeled me along. Blurry figures in green gowns and masks bustled around me, whisking me off to an exam room. I let out a feeble moan, trying desperately to focus on the faces around me through tear-filled eyes. Where was Kimberly? My confused, feverish mind couldn't keep track of her. Panic started to set in as the stark white walls seemed to close in on me. Suddenly, a kind face appeared above me. A young woman with blue eyes spoke in a calm, reassuring voice. She introduced herself as Jennifer, my nurse, and told me that Kimberly was just outside, taking care of the admission paperwork. I clung to Jennifer's kind voice like a lifeline as they moved me from the bright, noisy room to a quieter, dimmer one. With Jennifer's help, the staff gently transferred my frail body to a hospital bed, carefully removing my clothes and dressing me in a clean gown. Jennifer held my arm reassuringly as she took my temperature and blood pressure, then inserted an IV. The doctors performed quick examinations with serious expressions, then left, leaving Jennifer behind. In the relative quiet, as Jennifer adjusted my IV bag, I whispered fearfully, asking what was happening and what the doctors had said. Jennifer smiled warmly and told me they were still diagnosing, but assured me they'd take good care of me and that I should rest for now. Just then, Kimberly burst into the room, tears in her eyes, crying out my name. She rushed to embrace my weak body, breaking down at the sight of her beloved aunt looking so fragile and vulnerable. Jennifer gently placed a hand on Kimberly's shoulder, calmly telling her that they would take good care of me. She suggested Kimberly take a break, get some tea, and come back later to be with me. Kimberly wiped her tears, nodded gratefully, and left the room. As she walked down the hallway, I could hear her sobs gradually fading away. Alone again with me, Jennifer checked the monitor data and made notes in my chart. I gazed at the kind nurse through teary eyes, feeling an indescribable sense of relief at her presence. There was a familiar warmth in her calm eyes, but my weakened mind couldn't piece together who she reminded me of. Jennifer softly told me to rest, turning off some of the bright lights. She promised she'd be right there watching over me, assuring me I wasn't alone. Comforted by her promise and the warmth of her hand holding mine, I closed my eyes and gratefully surrendered to the darkness. Hours later, I woke up feeling groggy and weak. The room was dimly lit, with only faint light from the monitors. My throat felt terribly dry. Kimberly was slumped awkwardly in a chair beside the bed, exhausted and asleep. Looking down, I saw Jennifer still holding my hand. She woke up and informed me that the doctors would be back soon to talk to me. They had identified the infection and started me on a broad-spectrum antibiotic. I nodded, too tired to ask any more questions. I sank back into my pillow, letting consciousness slip away without the strength to fight it. As I drifted off again, I could have sworn I saw Jennifer glowing like a guardian angel. When I woke up again, it felt like only minutes had passed, but this time my throat was on fire. I croaked out a plea for water, my voice barely a whisper. Jennifer, bless her heart, gently held the glass to my lips, helping me take small sips. That cool liquid was like a healing balm, soothing my parched throat. I sighed with relief as I sank back into my pillow. Suddenly, two doctors burst in, talking loudly. They introduced themselves as Dr. David and Dr. Jacob, and started rattling off information about my condition. They were throwing around medical jargon like confetti at a parade: severe infection, dehydration, organ failure, need for surgery. My head was spinning trying to keep up with this flood of information. I looked at Jennifer, feeling lost and overwhelmed. She squeezed my hand reassuringly and nodded, silently promising to help me understand. I watched the doctors rush out as quickly as they'd come in, taking a deep breath as I tried to process everything. Jennifer, patient as always, broke it down for me in simple terms. I had a serious infection in my gallbladder that had spread to my bloodstream. They needed to remove the infected gallbladder, but I was too weak and dehydrated for surgery right now. First, they'd try to stabilize me with antibiotics and IV fluids. I tried to wrap my foggy mind around all this, but it was like trying to catch smoke with my bare hands. It hurt so much, I managed to whisper. Jennifer nodded, checking the monitors quickly. She told me they were giving me the maximum amount of pain medication allowed, and urged me to rest and gather my strength. A new wave of pain washed over me, and I let out a soft moan. The next few days passed in a haze of fever and semi-consciousness. I drifted in and out, plagued by unsettling dreams. Sometimes I'd wake up enough to croak out a few words or sip some water like it was holy nectar. Kimberly was there almost constantly, holding my hand and wiping my sweaty brow. Jennifer, too, was there as much as she could be, offering encouraging smiles and adjusting my blankets. Those days were a blur of tests, medical procedures, and fitful sleep. The doctors had diagnosed me with a dangerous infection. What had started as a simple urinary tract infection had spread to my kidneys and bloodstream. Given my age and weakened immune system, it had quickly become life-threatening. They started me on aggressive treatment with intravenous antibiotics and other medications. Every few hours, nurses would wake me to administer drugs or draw blood for tests. Just when I'd start to drift off, they'd poke me with another needle, force more pills down my throat, or give me another injection. Restful sleep became as elusive as a desert mirage. Through the haze of exhaustion and medication, I'd occasionally catch glimpses of Jennifer's kind face. She was one of the main nurses, a young woman who looked to be in her early 30s. I noticed her soft, tan skin and the golden hair neatly tucked under her cap. Jennifer had a warm, skilled touch as she tended to my treatments and tests. Her gentle hands drew blood and monitored my vital signs with a tenderness I hadn't experienced in years. When she wasn't busy with other patients, Jennifer would chat with me softly, trying to distract me from my misery. She'd talk about positive things like the weather or non-medical news of the day, attempting to soothe my frazzled nerves. Days turned into a week, then two, but my condition showed little improvement. The antibiotics seemed to be losing their battle against the stubborn infection ravaging my body. My fever and chills persisted, and my health continued to deteriorate. I had no appetite and was rapidly losing weight, my hospital gown hanging looser on my frame with each passing day. Kimberly, bless her heart, brought albums and books to ease the monotony of my hospital stay. But as my fever climbed, I found it increasingly difficult to focus for long periods. The painkillers and sedatives left my mind even foggier than before. As the days blurred together in an endless cycle of fever and discomfort, I found myself talking nonsense more and more often. In these delirious moments, one face that frequently appeared was Jennifer's. The kind and diligent nurse would check on me every few hours, administering medication in a seemingly endless routine. But in my sedated state, Jennifer's mature, angular features would sometimes transform before my eyes. Her warm blue eyes would grow larger, her jaw would soften and round out, and her golden hair would lighten to the shade of a young child's blonde locks. In those moments, I realized Jennifer bore a striking resemblance to April, the daughter I had given up for adoption during an incredibly difficult time in my life. I tried to moisten my dry throat and speak each time I saw this transformation, wanting to warn Jennifer, to tell her she looked like someone who had once been precious to me. But the sedatives in my system made it impossible to form the words, and before the hallucination faded, Jennifer would be back to her normal self, checking my medication dosages with a clipboard in hand. The vision would disappear like a mirage, and I'd sink back into semi-consciousness. Finally, during one of Jennifer's night rounds, I woke from a particularly vivid fever dream with an unusual clarity. In the dim light, Jennifer was leaning over me, about to take my temperature and blood pressure. Before the dedicated nurse could retreat back to the sterile hallway, I managed to call out to her in a hoarse voice. "Jennifer, wait," I croaked, my throat dry from sleep and medication. Jennifer turned back with a look of surprise and concern, asking if I was okay, or needed more pain medication. I managed to swallow hard, my throat feeling like sandpaper. "I'm all right for now," I stammered, hesitating to continue. Part of me feared she'd think I was just a senile old woman lost in delusions, but something pushed me forward. I took a deep breath and confessed that sometimes, when I was foggy from the fever and medication, I saw her image so vividly it felt real. Jennifer's face softened with understanding as she explained that fever-induced hallucinations often feel very real to patients and that I shouldn't worry. She assured me it was completely normal, given the severity of my infection. I nodded weakly, acknowledging her point. But I couldn't stop there, I had to tell her the rest. My voice caught as I revealed that in these visions, her face sometimes changed, becoming that of my daughter, my little April. It had been decades since I'd spoken that name aloud. Jennifer's brow furrowed slightly as she sat down in the chair beside me. As I lay there, I wondered if I'd done the right thing. Maybe my brain was just sorting through memories of my daughter during these feverish episodes. I'd heard the mind does strange things in altered states. I suppose that could be it. I said resignedly, thinking perhaps I was just projecting my long-lost daughter onto this kind nurse. Was my aging mind playing cruel tricks on me? But Jennifer continued, her blue eyes taking on a reflective look. She revealed that she had no memories of her early childhood before age 7, as she'd been adopted as a small child and knew nothing about her birth family. My dulled eyes suddenly sparked with interest at this revelation. Adopted? I had no idea, I said slowly, asking her to tell me more. Jennifer shrugged sadly, explaining there wasn't much to tell. She'd been taken to an orphanage around 18 months old, with no information about her birth parents or why she'd been given up. The records only showed an anonymous surrender. She'd wondered about her origins when she was younger, but the nuns at the orphanage had no information, so eventually she'd stopped asking. I furrowed my brow, trying to process this new information about Jennifer's early years in my fever-addled, exhausted mind. Was this just another coincidence brought on by my feverish hallucinations, or was there something more to this startling confession? Could this kind nurse actually be the daughter I'd long ago given up and thought lost forever? My heart began to race as I asked her, as calmly as I could manage, if she'd ever tried to find her birth parents or trace her roots. Jennifer sighed melancholically and shrugged her shoulders. She told me she'd tried a little, writing to the orphanage as a teenager to ask for more information. But all they could tell her was that she'd been left there as a baby, probably around 18 months old. No name, no details, nothing else. As time passed, she'd learned to accept it as just one of life's mysteries. She said she came to simply focus on the blessings in her life, her husband and 2 children. I nodded slowly, my mind still reeling but trying to be cautious. I didn't want to reveal my suspicions too quickly. I understand, I said softly. Family is, well, it's the most important thing we have. But I couldn't help probing further, asking if she'd ever gotten any clues about her birth parents, even just where she might be from. Jennifer nodded, a wistful look crossing her face. She admitted she often wondered what her mother was like, if they looked alike, if her mother would be proud of the person she'd become. But she quickly shook her head, saying those thoughts weren't productive and only led to feeling down. My heart was racing now, threatening to burst from my chest. I tried to keep my voice steady as I asked if she knew anything about where her birth parents might be from, or if she had any clues about her original hometown. Jennifer blinked, surprised by my sudden barrage of questions. She told me the orphanage records showed she'd been left at the Gates of Mercy's door in this very city, so she assumed she was from the area. Then she asked why I wanted to know. My heart pounded even harder as I tried to calm my erratic breathing. As evenly as I could, I explained that I was just curious. Then, hesitantly, I shared that I'd gone through a difficult time years ago and hadn't been able to raise my young daughter. My voice caught as I summed up the most painful, regretful period of my life. I told her my daughter's name was April, and she'd be about Jennifer's age now. And when I saw Jennifer's childhood face in my visions, it looked just like her. Jennifer's eyes went wide, her face paling. She whispered, asking if I was saying what she thought I was saying. Could she possibly be my daughter? Her hand flew to her mouth as she tried to process this unbelievable possibility. I nodded weakly, tears welling in my eyes as I reached out a thin, trembling hand towards her. In a low voice, I acknowledged how crazy it must sound, that it might just be the ramblings of a sick old woman. But I explained that from the moment she'd walked into my room, I'd felt a connection, something beyond just nurse and patient. And now, hearing about her past and seeing her face in my visions, I couldn't help but wonder. Jennifer suddenly stood up, accidentally knocking the tray of instruments off her lap onto the floor. She stammered that she needed to process this, running a shaky hand through her hair. Apologizing, she said she'd check on me later and rushed out of the room. I let out a trembling sigh and sank back into my pillow, utterly exhausted from the conversation. I began to worry that I'd been rash in sharing my suspicions. What if I'd upset or troubled Jennifer? She already faced so many challenges as a nurse in this busy hospital, and here I was, an old woman confusing her with wild speculations. These thoughts swirled in my mind until exhaustion finally pulled me into sleep. When I woke, the room was dark except for the faint glow of medical monitors. I could make out Kimberly's unmistakable silhouette in one of those uncomfortable hospital chairs across the room. As soon as I stirred, she perked up, asking how I was feeling. Then she hesitated, mentioning that Jennifer had seemed very shaken after our talk. So it hadn't been a strange dream after all. I really had confided my suspicions about Jennifer possibly being April. Judging by Jennifer's shocked reaction, she must have been seriously considering the possibility too. Wearily, I motioned Kimberly closer and whispered the details of that extraordinary conversation. I told her about Jennifer being left at an orphanage as a baby, knowing nothing of her birth parents, and how my fever-induced visions sometimes transformed Jennifer's face into young April's. I know it sounds crazy, I whispered, maybe it's just the ramblings of a senile old woman. But deep down, I feel something. Our meeting here can't just be coincidence. By the time I finished, tears were welling in Kimberly's eyes. After that special conversation, I didn't see or hear from Jennifer that night or the next day. Every time I woke between medications and tests, I'd glance hopefully at the door, longing to see her face and gauge her expression. Was she angry, confused, curious? But it was always unfamiliar faces, staff coming and going with tablets and medical supplies. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe I deeply offended Jennifer by hinting at a family connection when she was just being a kind nurse. Or perhaps I'd sparked her to confront the mystery of her childhood and reconsider her roots. That night, when Kimberly reappeared, I pleaded with her to find Jennifer and talk to her. I needed to know how she felt after my revelation. Kimberly clearly hesitated, concerned this might all be an incredible coincidence or the delusions of an elderly woman. But seeing the desperate plea in my eyes, she couldn't refuse. She gently squeezed my hand, promising to casually speak with Jennifer and see if there was any substance to my suspicions. I sank back into my pillow with relief, hoping for some answers soon. Later, Kimberly returned with a somber expression. She sat by my bed and quietly told me she'd managed to speak with Jennifer alone for a few minutes in the nurse's break room.
At first, Jennifer was reluctant to discuss the topic. She was still visibly shaken by Barbara's incredible suggestion. However, Kimberly gently assured Jennifer that there was no pressure or expectation, and if Barbara's thoughts had upset or distressed her, she would sincerely apologize on her aunt's behalf. Kimberly simply wanted to make sure Jennifer was okay in this unusual situation. Jennifer began to open up a bit, comforted by Kimberly's reassurance and calm demeanor. She admitted feeling completely confused and overwhelmed by the relationship Barbara had proposed. Jennifer confessed she'd been up most of the night thinking about it, with long-buried hopes of solving her childhood mystery bubbling to the surface. "I don't know what to think or how to feel," Jennifer confided in Kimberly. "Part of me is scared to open this Pandora's box from a vulnerable part of my past I thought I'd left behind, but another part wonders, what if it's true?" Tears welled in Jennifer's eyes as she faced this impossible yet tantalizing possibility. After a while, Jennifer wiped her eyes firmly and seemed to regain her composure. She continued, saying she couldn't just believe what might be an elderly woman's delusion. She needed more concrete evidence before seriously considering the idea. Jennifer suggested that once Barbara recovered enough to undergo testing, they could do a DNA test between them. That would provide a definitive answer one way or the other. Kimberly nodded thoughtfully, agreeing that Jennifer's suggestion made sense. A DNA test would resolve any ambiguity and clearly determine if there was a biological relationship.
As Kimberly shared Jennifer's plan with me, my eyes lit up and I wholeheartedly agreed. The next week or so was a roller coaster for my health. That stubborn infection kept fighting the antibiotics, leaving me cycling through high fevers and delirium. I had brief moments of clarity, but they left me feeling weak and exhausted. I overheard the doctors whispering about potential organ failure if the infection didn't clear up soon. My sweet Kimberly, bless her heart, sat by my bedside for hours, holding my hand and dabbing my forehead. She brought old family albums to spark happy memories. We'd chuckle weekly at snapshots of young me, striking dramatic poses in the latest fashions. My gleaming golden hair, daring miniskirts, and go-go boots made us laugh, but those laughs often turned to tears. When we got to April's baby pictures, Kimberly hugged my trembling shoulders as we reminisced about that tiny smiling face crawling around and taking her first wobbly steps. "My little angel, April," I whispered, "my precious baby, where are you now?" During one of my clearer moments, something unexpected happened. I was sitting up in bed, gazing absently at the bright spring sunshine outside when I heard a soft knock. I called out a weak "come in," expecting Kimberly or one of the regular nurses. To my utter shock, Jennifer herself hesitantly entered. I gasped, covering my mouth and struggling to sit up straighter. Why was she here now, after so long with no word since I'd brought up my suspicions? Jennifer approached my bed, fidgeting nervously with her hands. She greeted me quietly, unable to meet my eyes. She said it had been a while since we'd talked, but she wanted to check on me and tell me she couldn't stop thinking about our last conversation. I felt my heart start to race as I leaned further back into my pillows. With a trembling hand, I reached out towards her, whispering that I couldn't stop thinking about it either, and wondering how she felt about it all. Jennifer took a deep breath and finally looked me in the eye. She told me she thought there might be some truth to what I'd suggested about us, at least enough to warrant further investigation. Tears of joy welled up in my eyes. Hearing Jennifer finally open up to the possibility of our connection, I babbled excited words of gratitude as I grasped her hand in mine, ignoring the ache in my arm. Jennifer was tearing up too as she gazed at my frail face, as if truly seeing me for the first time. "Oh my God," she whispered, shaking her head in wonder, "this might really be true." After so long not knowing where she came from or anything about her family. We sat there for several minutes, holding hands and feeling this new connection between us. Finally, Jennifer took a deep breath, composed herself, and wiped her eyes. She admitted she still had some concerns and needed to maintain a degree of professional skepticism until we knew something definitive. I nodded vigorously, completely understanding. It was unbelievable to think my beloved daughter, who I thought lost forever, might be right here. But Jennifer was right, we needed to be cautious. We agreed to do a DNA test once my health stabilized enough. That would be the only sure way to confirm or deny any biological relationship between us. Jennifer also asked my permission to share this new information with her adoptive family, her parents, and siblings. If I truly was her birth mother, she felt they had a right to know. I readily agreed, eager to meet the family who had raised my long-lost child. In the days that followed, a sudden surge of vitality and optimism breathed new life into me. I gradually began regaining strength and energy as the persistent infection finally started yielding to the new round of antibiotics. I was still very weak and fragile, but the dangerous fatigue that had plagued me seemed to be lessening. I couldn't believe the change in myself when Kimberly came for one of her long visits. She exclaimed, noticing color in my cheeks, that I was looking better. She squeezed my hand, wondering if I was starting to improve, noting that my energy seemed to be returning. When I told Kimberly about Jennifer's wonderful visit, she gasped, covering her mouth in surprise. She could hardly contain herself as I shared every detail, from the hopeful look on Jennifer's face to our plans for the DNA test. Kimberly hugged me tightly, laughing and crying over this potential happy ending after decades of mystery and pain. Even my doctors noticed the improvement in my condition and mood. They commented that I seemed more alert, my vitals were stabilizing, and the terrible infection that had nearly taken me was finally abating. They attributed it to the new antibiotics, but Kimberly and I knew there was more fueling my will to fight. A few weeks later, Jennifer visited again. She appeared at my door with excitement shining in her eyes, saying she had news. Her adoptive family, though initially skeptical, was eager to solve this mystery. They had all agreed to provide DNA samples to compare with mine. We could have results in just days. I pressed a trembling hand to my chest, overwhelmed with emotion at the thought of finally having answers after decades of sorrow and regret. My beloved April might have been closer than I ever imagined. When the big day finally arrived, I could hardly speak from excitement. I insisted that Kimberly and Jennifer be there when the doctor delivered the potentially life-changing news. The three of us gathered in my hospital room, holding hands tightly and holding our breath. The doctor entered with a large envelope, his face unreadable as he announced he had the DNA test results. He carefully broke the seal as my heart pounded in my ears. Kimberly and Jennifer leaned forward expectantly. The doctor slowly unfolded the paper and began to read. After a few agonizing seconds of silence, his eyes widened and he looked up at us. "This is remarkable," he said. "There's a 95.5% probability of a biological relationship between Mrs. Smith and Jennifer Brown." I choked back a sob, my hands flying to my mouth. Kimberly cried out, her eyes wide as she hugged me, tears of joy streaming down her face. Jennifer stood frozen for a moment before a slow smile spread across her face. She joined our group hug, laughing and crying. "I can't believe it," Jennifer finally managed to say through her tears, gazing at my frail face as if seeing it for the first time. "You're my mother. You're really my mother." We held each other tightly, swaying gently, decades of unanswered questions between us. For the next hour, we huddled in that small hospital room, laughing, crying, and beginning to reclaim lost time. We exchanged stories and memories, marveling at similarities. Now knowing the truth, feeling this budding connection, Kimberly pulled out photo albums, pointing out features and mannerisms Jennifer shared with me. It was as if ghosts from the past were coming to life. When evening routines finally forced Kimberly and Jennifer to leave so I could rest and receive my medications, Jennifer promised to return the next day to start building our relationship as mother and daughter. We embraced again, reluctant to let go of something we'd both longed for. That night, after Kimberly and Jennifer had reluctantly gone, I lay awake until the lights dimmed and the hospital grew quiet. My mind kept spinning, processing the day's incredible events. After more than 30 years of grieving for the daughter I thought lost forever, I discovered that Jennifer, this dedicated nurse, was actually my beloved April. I couldn't contain the waves of joy, relief, and wonder at this miraculous reunion. I had prayed for so long for some sign that my daughter was out there, well and happy, and here she was. As I drifted off to sleep, tears in my eyes, I dreamed of making up for lost time with my rediscovered daughter. I imagined us cooking together, baking cookies and pancakes, feeding ducks in the park, just like when April was little. I pictured us laughing and running around, dreaming of the day when mother and daughter could go shopping together again. The next morning, after a peaceful sleep, I felt stronger than I had since arriving at the hospital. When breakfast arrived, the regular nurses were surprised to see me eagerly sitting up, ready to clear my plate of oatmeal, toast, orange juice, and coffee. It was the heartiest appetite I'd shown since my painful arrival at the hospital. While the staff attributed my recovery to the change in antibiotics, I knew it was my spirit revitalizing my body. As I finished breakfast, there was a soft knock at the door, and Jennifer's smiling face peeked in. Her eyes were shining with happiness. "Good morning, Mom," she said brightly as she bounced into the room. My heart swelled with love and wonder at those expected but still startling words. "Good morning, my child," I replied, my voice trembling as I reached out my fragile arms. Jennifer sat on the edge of the bed and hugged me, gentle but firm. We spent several minutes just holding each other, savoring the quiet reverence of the moment. Finally, Jennifer leaned back, blinking back tears. "Oh, Mom," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I still can't believe this is real." She shook her head in amazement, at a loss for words after years of not knowing where she came from. I cradled Jennifer's face in my frail hands, drinking in every detail as if trying to memorize her. "Let me look at you, just let me look," I whispered. "You've grown into such a beautiful, accomplished woman. But when I look in your eyes, I still see my little girl." Jennifer laughed through her tears, shaking her head at the miracle of finding her mother. We talked nonstop for the next few hours, as if trying to make up for lost time. We exchanged stories about our lives, marveling at incredible coincidences and connections. Jennifer reflected on always feeling drawn to medicine and caring for others, leading her to become a nurse. She spoke of certain foods or songs that stirred nostalgic feelings inside her, though she never understood why. "It's like some part of me always felt this connection to you, even across the distance," Jennifer said in wonder. I smiled with loving wisdom, nodding at the resilience of the mysterious bond between mother and child. As the afternoon wore on and it was time for my next round of treatments and tests, we were reluctant to part after this joyous reunion. But Jennifer promised to return the next day, saying she'd start making arrangements for my discharge as my health continued to improve daily. "The doctors say if I keep progressing like this, I'll be able to go home soon," I said, my voice full of hope. Jennifer smiled and kissed the forehead of her newly found mother. "Then we'll have even more opportunities," she said. "We have a lifetime to catch up on." Jennifer said a loving goodbye and left to complete her duties. I settled back, my heart full, to await the days to come. We fell into a sweet routine, spending an hour each morning when Jennifer's shift started, talking, laughing, and delighting in new discoveries about each other. Sometimes Kimberly would join us, marveling at the miraculous reunion of her beloved aunt and long-lost cousin. My days were filled with a light and joy I hadn't known since that day so many years ago when I parted with my dear April. Even when Jennifer wasn't there, the knowledge that my child was safe and thriving filled my heart. For me, there was a peaceful sense of healing, and I soon regained enough strength to sit by the window. I gazed out at the world with bright eyes, feeling I would soon be connected to it again. A few days later, on one momentous morning, I woke up early. I felt unusually tired but full of energy. It was finally the day I'd be discharged from the hospital to continue my recovery at home. The terrible infection had subsided, and Kimberly and Jennifer were planning to pick me up later that morning. As the breakfast bell rang, I dressed for the first time in weeks and sat nervously at the small table in my hospital room. I savored every bite of the steaming scrambled eggs and fresh orange juice, knowing it was my last meal here. A new chapter was about to begin as I returned to the outside world and reunited with my daughter. When Jennifer arrived with a wheelchair to discharge me, I let out a cry of joy. We hugged tightly, laughing and crying at the same time. "I'm going home," I whispered, feeling Jennifer beaming beside me. She confirmed it, saying, "Yes, Mom. We're going home." The fresh air felt wonderful on my face as they carefully helped my fragile body into Kimberly's car. As Jennifer and Kimberly chatted happily leaving the parking lot, I sat in quiet contemplation. After weeks of fighting for my life, returning to the big world felt overwhelming. Green trees whizzed by, warm sunlight danced on my lap, and I felt reborn, experiencing everything like a newborn. The scent of pine wafted on the breeze, endless blue sky stretched above, and children's laughter floated from a nearby park. It was like witnessing a miracle. Soon we turned onto my familiar street, and my modest apartment came into view. This ordinary yet precious place I hadn't seen in so long appeared before me. Jennifer and Kimberly carefully helped me out of the car, supporting my arms as we slowly walked toward the entrance steps. Kimberly cheerfully announced we are home while searching for her keys. But I pointed to a sunny bench nearby and quietly asked to sit and breathe the air a little longer. Jennifer and Kimberly exchanged understanding glances and gently lowered me onto the bench. I sighed contentedly, turning my face to the sun and closing my eyes. I felt the warmth seeping into my bones as I listened to the distant hum of city traffic and cooing pigeons in nearby trees. Jennifer's hand slid gently around mine while Kimberly soothingly rubbed circles on my back. After endless days and nights in the hospital, nearly losing hope, this simple feeling of being alive and returning home overwhelmed me. I couldn't stop joyful tears from slipping beneath my closed lids and rolling down my pale, sunken cheeks. Jennifer squeezed my hand as Kimberly tenderly dabbed my face with a handkerchief. Kimberly whispered understandingly that tears don't always mean sadness. Sometimes they're pure joy and relief, she said, and in this special moment, I had every right to cry. I opened my eyes, gazing at my dear niece with deep love and gratitude before turning to Jennifer. "You're right," I said softly, "these are tears of overwhelming happiness. This beautiful day with both of you by my side after being lost for so long is life's greatest gift." We sat quietly for a while, simply existing together peacefully. Eventually, Jennifer and Kimberly helped me stand, supporting me as we carefully climbed the familiar stairs. Kimberly opened the door and led me inside. As we walked down the hall to my beloved apartment 5, I stifled a gasp when I crossed the threshold. Everything was exactly as I'd left it, as if time had stood still. The lace curtains I'd sewn, embroidered cushions on the worn sofa, smiling cherubs on the shelves, and framed photos of my late husband, parents, and grandparents. It was like stepping back in time. With Jennifer and Kimberly at my sides gently supporting me, I toured each room, rediscovering familiar corners. I stopped often to lovingly touch familiar objects or gaze at old photographs. I marveled at how it felt like I'd lived several lifetimes between the last time I was here and now. That afternoon, after I'd rested, the three of us gathered around the kitchen table to enjoy a celebratory snack for my homecoming. Kimberly had thoughtfully stocked the fridge with my favorite foods, and Jennifer carefully sliced fresh watermelon and cheese. Kimberly poured a little sparkling wine into some fancy glasses she'd found, and Jennifer proposed a toast. Our eyes shining with the promise of new beginnings and second chances, we clinked our glasses together, saying, "We're all finally home," our happy laughter filling the air. After that, we settled into easy, comfortable conversation as the setting sun cast a warm glow through the lace curtains. While Kimberly washed dishes and tidied up the kitchen, Jennifer lovingly prepared my bed to ensure I'd sleep comfortably. As she gently stroked my thin gray hair, speaking in a soft voice, I felt my eyelids growing heavy. "Don't go yet," I whispered. Jennifer smiled and quietly moved the rocking chair next to my bed, settling into it.
Jennifer watched Barbara's chest rise and fall rhythmically, noticing how her breathing became deeper and more regular with each exhale. Years of pain and exhaustion seemed to be finally fading away in this safe and familiar sanctuary. Barbara's weary heart was healing, rejuvenating. Jennifer lost track of time as she sat quietly beside her newly discovered mother, lost in thought. The years melted away, and roles had reversed. She was lovingly watching over the dreams of the fragile woman who had given her life so long ago. As the light outside dimmed and shadows filled the small room, Jennifer remained seated, silently shedding tears of happiness. Finally, hearing Kimberly finish up in the kitchen, Jennifer gently wiped her eyes and stood up. She lightly stroked Barbara's white hair and whispered, "Good night, Mom. I'll be back in the morning." She then quietly padded down the hallway to where Kimberly was waiting to say goodnight.
The next morning, warm sunlight streamed through my window, gently rousing me from sleep. For a moment, I was disoriented, staring in wonder at the familiar lace curtains and hand-knitted quilt. Then, remembering I was back with my beloved April, joy flooded through me. I let out a deep, peaceful sigh as I slowly sat up in bed. Savoring the quiet morning tranquility, I listened to the cheerful birdsong outside and a dog barking in the distance. These were the sounds of my old neighborhood, once taken for granted, but now they seemed like a glorious symphony to my ears. Mindful of my still sensitive body, I stood up and wrapped myself in my robe. Supporting my weary frame, I made my way slowly to the kitchen, drawn by the smell of breakfast. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the tantalizing scent of eggs and bacon beckoned me. I assumed Kimberly and Jennifer had arrived and were eagerly cooking. As I shuffled down the short, familiar hallway, I was startled to see a stranger cheerfully cooking at the stove with his back to me. I gasped, and as the man turned in surprise, his eyes widened with shock and joy, a broad smile spreading across his face. "Mom," he exclaimed happily, rushing around the small table to envelop me in a bear hug. At first, I froze, tense and confused in this stranger's arms, but then I heard his laughter mingling with tears. "Mom, it's me, Ralph," he said. Pulling back to look at his face, I raised a trembling hand to my mouth, breathless. Could it be my lost son, Ralph? I wondered, my shaking hand caressing his smiling face. My vision blurred with tears as I desperately searched for something familiar in his mature features. "Yes, it's me," Ralph cried joyfully. "I've come home." Weeping with happiness, I threw myself back into his arms, holding him tight and laughing through my tears. Ralph gently whispered, his own eyes wet, that he'd found me and we were together again. Together as a mother and son, clinging to each other, too overwhelmed to speak. Finally, Ralph pulled back slightly to look at my tear-stained face. "Mom, you're thinner than when I last saw you," he joked, his trembling hand stroking my soft gray hair. "Come on, let's get some food in you. We've got a lot of catching up to do." Gently, Ralph guided me, still shaking with surprise and joy, to the kitchen table. He pulled out a chair for me and set down a plate of steaming scrambled eggs, bacon, and toast. Pouring a hot café au lait, he handed it to me, softly encouraging me to eat. Amazed, I couldn't take my eyes off Ralph's beaming face as I began to eat unconsciously. As he filled his own plate, my mind whirled with questions. There's so much to ask, I don't know where to begin, I thought. How had Ralph found his way back to me after all these years? As if reading my mind, Ralph began to explain cheerfully. Between bites, he said, "Mom, it was your daughter." He continued with a playful grin, telling me that after connecting with me here, she had started searching for the rest of my family. They had wanted to surprise me. I was speechless with astonishment for a moment. In the shock of reuniting with my lost daughter, I realized I had momentarily forgotten about my beloved son. Of course, Jennifer would have been searching for Ralph too. I felt a little ashamed for having completely forgotten that. I reached out, covering Ralph's hand on the table with mine. "I'm sorry, my darling," I whispered, tears welling in my eyes. The shock of reuniting with Jennifer made me lose my mind for a while. "But I want you to know something." My voice trembled, tears spilling over again. "In all the years we were apart, there wasn't a single day I didn't think of you and pray for you, my precious son."
If you enjoyed this story, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. This will allow us to continue sharing wonderful stories every day. Don't miss the amazing stories that will be coming up next. Thank you so much for your support. Until next time.